Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of On the Sofa with Sarah. I am absolutely delighted to have Barry and Wayne with us today. And the reason that they are with us is that June is all about Pride and celebrating Pride. And, you know, included within that is that celebration of the LGBTQ plus community. And throughout all of June, across the whole country, different companies are, you know, raising awareness about Pride and, you know, really wanting to create a more inclusive country, which is accepting of everybody. And I'm really pleased that we have got a whole week dedicated to focusing on Pride and the LGBTQ plus community. And we thought, what a great opportunity for another On the Sofa for two of my team who have willingly and very kindly volunteered to share their experiences and their story with you all. So welcome Barry and welcome Wayne to our virtual sofa.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you both here. So, you know, as I said, we are absolutely celebrating Pride Month, and, you know, it's really important to me, as I know it is to both of you, that people feel that they are able to be open and be able to share their experiences, because I think we all feel extremely passionate that we want Starfline to be a place where people can be themselves. Everyone is, you know, absolutely welcome and really embracing that value of being authentic. So thank you. And I know that this is a really brave thing for you both to do. So I do really appreciate it. And I'm sure our audience does as well. So I think it'd be really great just to start with your own personal stories and experiences as you've gone through your life and discovery. So Barry, do you mind starting, just sharing a little bit about your story with everybody?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So I suppose, you know, it all started for me. I was fairly young when I kind of realised that, you know, I was gay, and you know, it's funny because you reminisce about trying to pinpoint that point in your life when I think you realise that this is who you are. And you know, I can kind of cast my mind back to as far as I think I was about 8 years old, and I was in kind of the latter stage of primary school, really, and it was the kind of a first trip out to the theatre. So we went to a theatre in Wolverhampton, and we went to see The Wizard of Oz. Which interestingly then had no reference to me being gay, obviously, but effectively, you know, I was kind of drawn to this guy that was in part of the theatre production, and you know, didn't quite know why, didn't know what that kind of, you know, why I was so drawn to that individual, but you know, went afterwards to buy the book because his face was on the back and I wanted to take it home. And yeah, so although, you know, it probably wasn't a physical attraction at that point, it was more of a kind of, you know, actually there's something here, and that's kind of where I draw it back to, I think.
Yeah, okay, so quite young really in your childhood, where you had that sense of a different type of a feeling and an attraction. Wayne, is that a similar kind of experience to you, or is yours a different, I guess, experience in terms of when you realised that you were attracted to men?
Yeah, so I was a bit later than our Barry. So for me, I probably realised or came to terms with it when I was in my teens. So I think I experimented a bit during my teens, and I absolutely came to the realization, I think probably when I was in high school, that I was gay, and I think I then went on that journey of coming to terms with that. And I think back then there was, you know, there was there was no attention on this sort of stuff when I was at high school. So I went through quite a difficult process of coming to terms, and people were not as kind back then as they perhaps are now. And I think so I think for me it was certainly when I was in my teens and I realised that I think I was gay.
And that, I mean, you just hit on something there, because I guess for both of you, regardless of how old you are, one, when you notice that, you might have feeling towards an attraction towards men, and that you then explore that further, and, what could that mean? And then I guess, begin to identify yourself as gay, going from that self-discovery to then probably feeling a pressure to then have to come out, if you like. How did that experience and how did that journey, I guess, unfold itself in terms of, having a realization, but then feeling a level of, a need to then have to share that? I mean, Barry, how did that work for you?
Yeah. So I think although I kind of recognise in myself that something was different, I would probably say at that stage, because that's kind of how I was. I didn't share, and I didn't come out till I was 16. So I lived with a lot of knowing stuff, and almost I'd probably say through secondary school particularly, trying to hide and to cover. So I kissed girls, that was it. People would ask, people would take, as they do at secondary school, children can be really quite, mean. Yes, I was bullied, I was called, shirt lifter, this, that, and the other. You name it, it all happened. But I suppose, I spent time trying to cover it up. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of the things that people say to me, so did your family know? Did they recognise? Are the closest to you? And I came out at 16, and my story of coming out, if you like, is I was on my first holiday away with my friends. I got rather drunk, told two of my girlfriends at the time that this is who I am. The next morning had recollection that, oh my goodness, I've told one of my friends whose mom works with my mom, what is going to happen? I can't have someone else tell my parents something that is about me and that they would be hurt if I didn't tell them. So I got home and literally had kind of said to my mom and dad, I need to tell you something. And literally the whole story, and I couldn't write it, and I get goosebumps even to this day, but my mom's first words were, please tell me you've not got someone pregnant on holiday. And I literally remember saying to her, this couldn't be further away from where your mind is now, so we need to kind of talk. So we did, and I kind of shared, and I think for me, my relationship with my mom is very close. She was a single parent. We were together for a long period of time, just me and her. And my stepdad came into my life, and he's part of my life, and he's my dad as I see him. But I think my mom took it really, really, really badly. Herself blamed the fact that she didn't have a father figure upbringing, and that she was responsible for that. And I think in her head, the more that she's kind of now come to terms with it, I think as a parent, what she describes is she's painted a picture in her head around the life of her little boy and what will happen and the milestones that little boy's life will demonstrate. And when you're kind of telling her, actually, I'm gay, and that's not all of the stuff that you've dreamed of is never going to happen. I think it was quite impactful and quite hard for her. I think, they're from Shropshire, so they don't have lots of visibility around gay people or people with gay sons or all the community in general. So it was, I think all they saw was stuff that happened on the telly. All of the things that happened in the 80s around, the AIDS pandemic and all of that stuff. I think those were their initial concerns around, how do I keep my son safe in a world I don't know anything about, and B, that the media is portrayed to be not a very nice society.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, that I guess as parents and I'm not a parent myself, but I can imagine that absolutely when people choose to have children, you know, they create a story of their own in terms of, you know, getting, you know, they're going to meet somebody of the opposite sex, they're going to, you know, have children, they're going to get married, and actually when their assumptions and story doesn't become realized, or it will become a different story, it's not only what you're going through as an individual, but it's, you know, almost carrying that weight of responsibility for your mum at the time as well. And you know, that must have been a very brave conversation, and I would imagine quite a distressing outcome, I guess.
Yeah, so lots of tears, lots of, you know, my mom didn't speak to me for a number of weeks. When I then moved away to university, so I think she almost felt like I'd dropped this bombshell on her, and I then walked away, which I think she didn't quite enjoy.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I was really fortunate that my stepdad actually really, you know, really surprised me, because he's a real man's man in that, you know, the typical football and all of that sort of stuff, the Geordie and all of this.
Yeah.
He was just so curious about trying to understand what it is. Why is it that you like men? Talk to me. I'll tell you why I like women, and all of that stuff. And I'd probably say that was probably a turning point in mine and my dad's relationship, to be honest, in terms of that we've probably never been particularly close until that point, until he was, I want to understand the world that we're to go into. So
yeah, so a real curiosity,
absolutely.
you know, which I guess is you know, something that felt quite nice and different, and one that wanted to understand.
Yeah.
Wait, what about you? You know, you talked about the fact that you probably didn't really identify as being gay until, you know, you were in senior school. What was your coming out story and journey?
So it's not vastly dissimilar to Barry's, interestingly, and I think so. When I look back, I think there's almost three parts to my coming out, and I think the first one was I came out to my friends first, absolutely, because I think when you're looking to do something like this, you should absolutely feel comfortable and do it in the safest way possible, that you know the most comfortable environment you want to do it in. And for me, that was my group of friends. And I think at that point I had a really big group of female friends who absolutely embraced it. They loved it, and I think that enabled me to feel comfortable within school, despite what was happening outside of that group.
Yeah.
I think that probably was about 18 months, and then I finally plucked up the courage to come out to my parents, and I did that, and I can remember the date I did it. It was June the 25th, 2007, and and for me it was, I sent my mum a text message, and I really wish I'd saved it because it was a garbled thing, but it basically told her that I was gay, and
By text message.
By a text message, absolutely.
Okay.
I was ahead of my time. And I then climbed out my bedroom window, and beneath my bedroom window I had a ledge which was above the front door. So I climbed out the bedroom window, went to meet my friend who lived around the corner, and said, I've done it, I've done it, I've done it. And we then went walking for hours, and it must have been 3 or 4 hours before I finally plucked up the courage to go back home. I went back home. My mum came downstairs and she had a load of washing in her hands, and she said to me, so I think it was something akin to, so you're gay then, or something like that. And yeah, absolutely. And we didn't speak after that for probably about 3 days. And it wasn't, and I think I ended up moving in with my my nanny Joyce for those couple of days. And it wasn't until, again, similar to Barry, that my stepdad kind of came in. My stepdad's been with me since I was very young, so like Barry, is kind of my dad. But it wasn't until he stepped in and basically said to my mum, look, he's your son, nothing's changed, he's still the same person. And after that, it was as if nothing had happened. And I think the biggest worry that my mum had was that where we lived at the time, it was a council estate, it was a little bit rough, I suppose. And I think she was genuinely worried about what other people would say and do. And so I think her lack of understanding at that time, I think, came from a place of care rather than a place of he's wrong or whatever. And then I think the third part to it was fast forward sort of 2 months to my 18th birthday. And I hadn't yet come out to my wider family. I have a really large extended family. My mum put my 18th birthday together. All of my family came. I had a group of about 20 female friends surrounding me, and as you can imagine, knowing me by now, Sarah, I arrived at that party with a sailor's hat on and a pink feather boa. So I kind of absolutely, at that point, I think my family, if they didn't already know, absolutely knew at that point. Yeah. And I think by the time I was 18, I'd embraced myself in terms of who I was, and I think it was kind of up to everybody else to ask questions if they had any questions, and I just after that went to uni and lived a very very good few years.
Thank you for sharing. And I think my reflections from that, if I think about the stages that you have both gone through, which is one, a sense of feeling of being different, two, having to come to terms with that actually almost by yourself, really, in terms of grappling with feeling a bit different, feeling attracted to men rather than women, so being outside of what is the society norm. Grappling with that as an identity, and then having to have the courage to then come out to loved ones, and then managing a reaction that was, I guess, probably not necessarily is what you may have hoped for. And then when you've done that, it's then still going through that identity of who am I, and that evolution of that identity, so if you were both to reflect back from where you are now to either that boy of 8 or the boy of 16, Wayne, what would be the advice that you would give your younger selves now if you could go back and do it differently or do it again?
I think for me, it would be, I did the first part very well. In terms of I did it in a safe way. I did it in a way I was comfortable with. I did it with my closest friends, and I would absolutely do that again.
Yeah.
I think the thing for me is the second part I would probably do differently. I probably wouldn't send my mum a text message. Yeah, I would absolutely. I would probably do it in a different way. I'd probably sit down, have the conversation. But you know what? I'm not sure that she would have responded any differently. I think it's a really difficult thing to do. And if you think about, I'm sure Barry will agree with this in some respects, but I've had to come out so many times over the years because you just do it to every new person, and people feel a little bit awkward asking you the question. And they absolutely shouldn't. Have you got a boyfriend? Have you got have you got a partner? You kind of come out so many different times over the years, and I don't know that I would necessarily, other than the text message, do anything different personally.
What about you, Barry?
I think for me, one of the biggest things I would probably tell my younger self is to be brave. It's absolutely hard trying to live as somebody who you're not. It is probably one of the hardest things I can probably say that anybody has to do, is try to play a role for so many years that just isn't you, and that you can't speak openly and honestly and freely about who you are and what it is you do. So I think the advice to me was, I think I probably should have had the confidence and the voice. I've got two very loving parents, and yes, although that had impact to them, and perhaps it didn't go as I expected, but actually it's probably, I'm going to sound probably really harsh, but it's about probably being selfish.
Yeah.
Selfish and doing what's right for you as soon as you know that that's the right thing to do.
Yeah. And I guess if we look to, you know, where we are now as a society, you know, I would say as a, you know, as someone who is heterosexual, that, you know, I feel that as a society we are more aware of gender, we are more aware of sexuality, we're more aware of identity. I get a sense that there is more acceptance than there used to be. However, I do feel that we still have a long way to go. You know, the fact that people still have to come out, you know, and you and I, we've all spoken about this, you know, still doesn't feel that that's the right way to be. You know, we shouldn't have to come out of anything. You know, I have a big belief, and when we were talking about, you know, national, you know, you know, women shouldn't have to feel that they have to be something different. I have a massive passion about we all have to be ourselves and be happy and authentically us. I guess you know, knowing where your journey has come from, and you know, we've all talked a lot about It's a Sin in that channel, you know, Channel 4 series, and what was happening in the 80s around AIDS. That, you know, there's definitely been an evolution and journey around sexuality, gender and identity. But what would your advice be for individuals who are trying to understand and explore their sexuality and identity? You know, what nuggets could you offer to anyone who's watching today or has a son or daughter that they can identify with some of this journey with? Is there any words of wisdom or advice you would like to offer up? Come on, one of you.
It's
Are you going
difficult,
first,
isn't it?
Wayne, or?
No, you can go first. Go on.
So I think, so if I'll start with kind of So I think, going back to what you said, Sarah, I think the world has moved forward since where we were. If you look at the 80s, absolutely. Yeah. But there is absolutely a huge amount of, you know, of progress still to be made. You know, you only have to think about the fact that, you know, conversion therapy is still legal in this country. You only have to look around, you know, some of the European, you know, some of the nations, and it is still criminalized to be a homosexual in certain countries, and you face the death penalty. And you know, we don't just have a responsibility to the people that live in the United Kingdom, but we have a responsibility to everybody around the world that is fighting to be who they truly are. And you know, I think that, you know, advice to parents, I think that one of the biggest things for me is, you know, ask questions, be curious first and foremost. And I think the biggest thing that helped my mom is reaching out to somebody who also was going through the same thing. So an ally that was experiencing, you know, their son was gay, you know, it helped them to kind of talk through a different scenario and a different situation than perhaps other people might not understand. And kind of that creates that safe space, I'd probably say. But I think an individual has to do it in their own time. Nobody can force, and nobody should be forced to come out, or, you know, nobody should ever share anybody else's coming out story. That's not fair and not right. And I think an individual just has to be prepared that there still is, society still has pockets where it is not welcome. Yeah. So, you know, do I feel comfortable to walk down the street holding my partner's hand? No, I don't, and I don't think I ever will. I don't think I ever will. And that's because of situations of history that's happened to me, or that I've been in, that perhaps has, you know, not gone well, and therefore I don't want to, essentially, I probably say, create an issue when I could avoid the issue, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. So we've still got a long way to go, but, you know, keep talking about it, keep talking. And I think I also heard that, you know, an individual,
you know, it's about their journey, their story, and when they're willing to tell it, and when they do, it's about being curious and understanding when they do. Thank you, Barry. Wayne, anything you want to add to that?
I think the biggest thing for me is just, you know, we've all got our own realities, haven't we? And we've all got our own situations. And I think so when you make the decision to come out, you have to feel that you can do that in a safe way, and in the right way. And I think interesting, I read something the other day that said in the last 5 years, so since you know, a lot's happened in the last 5 years, but in the last 5 years, hate crimes against LGBTQ plus people have gone up by 55% in the UK.
Wow.
And that's just reportable stuff. That's only the stuff that's been reported. So that thing around doing it safely is absolutely the most important thing for me. And I think that there is almost, if you think about how I did mine in parts. If a person can't be themselves at home, then it is important that they can be themselves within their friendship groups and at work. So it's also about the things that organisations do to, you know, to, I guess, enable people to be themselves. And there are so many different groups out there now. You know, the most obvious being Stonewall, which, you know, they still do a tremendous job, Stonewall doing. They're coming under a lot of scrutiny at the moment because they're really pushing for supporting transgender people, and they're facing a lot of scrutiny at the moment. But there's also lots of local organisations as well that you can reach out to. You know, most of us have got access to the internet, so if you do want to reach out to somebody and talk to somebody that's been through it, these organisations can connect you to people, and so it's also doing that.
And certainly, you know, part of our focus on Pride and the whole week of dedicated events is, you know, I hope a step towards Staffline becoming a more inclusive culture where people can go for help, resources, and find and find a place where they can talk and share about, you know, their own experiences. So finally, I know, Wayne, you touched on it a little bit. What, for both of you, you know, working in a function who I would hope you feel is an inclusive function and people team where we are absolutely wanting people to feel included and welcome. What advice would you give for any line managers who are listening or other organisations to absolutely support a more inclusive culture?
I think, sorry, Wayne, there's two bits of me. I think I'm really lucky that I think most teams that I've worked in, people are generally curious and like to ask questions. And I think, and it's not just about the LGBTQ plus community. I think it's about any community that faces discrimination or inequality or lack of equality, I should say, actually just trying to understand and ask questions to build education around what's happening for the individual, the society that they live in, the community that they're part of, I think for me is so important. And I think if organisations can start to build the education element of some of that in their workforce or celebrating like we are in Pride Week, I think that is a really huge step forward. Yeah.
Thank you. Wayne?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's almost a bit of an in joke among the LGBTQ plus community that come June, all of the big companies change their logos and add a rainbow flag, and that's wonderful because it raises awareness. But it's what else do you do within that? And what we're doing this year is so important and so good because we're doing so many different things, and you know, that whole piece around education I think is the most important thing. And I think then it's then about actually, well, June is 1 month, and then what you do throughout the rest of the year, not necessarily about focus, but it's about building within culture that you know, that importance of accepting people for who they are, and enabling people to just be their authentic self. And it is that we may only have the month that we focus on, but it's the rest of the year as well.
Thank you, and thank you both for your honesty, your authenticity, and I'm sure that people watching this will have learned a lot, and will hopefully become more curious. I think as an organisation, as a culture, by continually, we have a drumbeat now regularly of campaigns, whether that's about women, then whether that's about mental health. We've got Black History Month coming up. We want to educate and raise awareness of I guess different groups of people who have often been discriminated against and are still discriminated against. But more importantly, and as we close, I think the message, regardless of whether it's Pride, whether it's Black History, whether it's about women, I think the everlasting message is listen, be curious, talk, share, create an environment where people can be their authentic self, and we will absolutely move towards a more inclusive organisation. So thank you both for your time. Thank you everyone for listening, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.